Safety procedures must be used when training or working on all equipment or vehicles. But there are several safety items that are peculiar only to the M1 tank. During this tape, you will learn the safety precautions that are peculiar to the M1 series tank. You will be asked to stop the tape and answer questions on the safety precautions, so have a pencil and paper ready. The M1 series tank is the Army's newest tank. This vehicle has many unique features that have created special safety problems that you must be aware of when working on the tank. One of these features is the hull skirts, which protect the suspension system. The number 1 skirt weighs about 945 pounds. You are to never open more than one skirt on the same hinge line at the same time. The skirt could break off and injure you. The hinge lines are between skirts 1 and 2, 3 and 4, and between 5 and 6. When a skirt has to be removed, the other skirt that is on the same hinge line must be supported. Here, skirt 2 is supported by a jack because skirt 1 is going to be removed. After inspection of this sling for any damage, it will hold skirt 1. Notice the shackles that are in the lifting eyes of the skirt. Shackles are used because the hooks of the sling are too large to fit properly in the lifting eyes. The hull skirts are not the only part of the suspension system requiring special care. During your training, there will be times when you must work on the tank with the power pack installed and being operated. In this case, the final drives must be disconnected. First, you must put blocks under the front and rear of each track. Vibrations from the power pack running can cause the final drive to engage. The final drive disconnects the drive sprockets from the transmission. Also, suction by the oil in the transmission can cause the final drive to engage at any given moment, causing your fingers to be crushed behind the final drive adapter you are trying to engage or disengage. So you must keep your hands out of this area. The tank could lunge from its parked position and cause a soldier to be injured or killed. Be very careful of where you stand. You can easily see why it is important to be sure the final drives are disconnected. They must always be disconnected in a classroom environment. Another major safety concern is the shock absorber torsion bar housing. Occasionally, the housing must be pulled for maintenance. Caution must be taken because of its extreme weight and its sharp edges. Teamwork must be used when removing the housing. You must always wear gloves or use rags to handle the shock absorber torsion bar housing to prevent the sharp edges from cutting your hands. Be very careful that you do not get your fingers caught behind the housing and the hull or under the housing when you set it on the floor. The fire extinguishers in the M1 series tank pose another safety hazard. The fire extinguisher bottle should never be removed from the holding bracket in the tank until the safety pin and anti-recoil plug have been installed. This is to prevent the accidental discharge of the fire extinguisher, which can cause the bottle to propel itself like a rocket. Discharge of the halon-filled extinguisher can also cause extreme irritation to the eyes, nose, and throat. It is important that the crew evacuate the compartment within 5 minutes if the fire extinguisher has been discharged. Exposure can be hazardous for crew members. It's time to stop the tape and write down all the safety precautions you've learned about each item listed on the screen. Restart the tape when you're finished. Stop the tape. Number 1 was the skirts. You should have written the warning that stated, Never open more than one skirt on the same hinge line at the same time. Remember, it could fall and injure you. You should have also written, if you're going to remove a skirt, the other skirt that's on the same hinge line must be supported with a jack. The sling should be inspected for any damage, then used to remove the skirt. Number 2 on the list was final drives. You should have written that the final drives must be disconnected in a classroom environment. When disconnecting the final drive, be very careful of where you put your hands in case the final drive should engage. You could lose your fingers. You must also be careful of where you stand. If the final drive engages, the tank could lunge and you could be injured. Number 3 was shock absorber torsion bar housing. You should have written that you'd wear gloves or use rags to remove the shock absorber torsion bar housing to prevent cuts of the hands. And you must be careful not to get your fingers caught behind or underneath the housing. Number 4, fire extinguisher. You should have written that the fire extinguisher bottle should never be removed from the holding bracket until the safety pin and anti-recoil plug have been installed to prevent accidental discharge of the halon. You should have noted that if the halon is discharged, the tank should be evacuated within 5 minutes. It can be hazardous to the crew. Let's move on to more safety items that are peculiar only to the M1 series tank. When you're going to use a hoist to move any heavy equipment, it is important to check the web straps for cuts and wear or any breaks. The web straps must be in good condition and wrapped tightly around the item being hoisted. You must be careful not to stand between the hoist and the item being lifted. You must also be sure not to place your hands or your body between the hoist and the vehicle. Now, let's look at the safe way to use an A-frame when lifting and moving the power pack out of an M1. The power pack weighs approximately 4.5 tons, so use extreme caution when lifting and moving it. Before attaching the lifting sling, be sure all disconnect points have been checked. Attach the sling to the hoist. Then attach the sling to the pack. Carefully lift the pack from the hull. When the power pack has been raised enough, you will remove the saddle caps. They sit above the transmission outputs and mount the outputs to the final drives. The saddle caps are not fastened to the pack and can fall, possibly causing serious injury. After removing the saddle caps, raise the power pack high enough to clear the vehicle. Move the A-frame backward so that the pack will clear the vehicle. When you're moving or working with an A-frame, you need 4 men, one positioned at each corner to maneuver it safely. Make sure that no one gets under the load that is suspended by the A-frame or between the A-frame and the load. Carefully set the pack down. When running an engine inside or outside the tank, we are faced with another major safety problem peculiar to the M1 series tank. Extreme heat and strong carbon monoxide is created by the engine. You must remember to stand a minimum of 20 feet from the tank's exhaust system. You could be overcome by heat and fumes. Before running an engine in a shop area, there must be adequate ventilation. Some shops have permanent exhaust fans installed. Other shops may use the portable exhaust system. This vents the heat outside through the flex pipes. A sign must be posted to warn pedestrians and passing traffic of the possible hazard. There is one other safety precaution that must be mentioned. That is powerized depression of the main gun. Never stand or walk under the gun. These signs should hang from every gun tube in the school environment. If there is a fault in the electrical system or carelessness on the part of a crew member or mechanic, when the turret is powered, the main gun will immediately fall to zero depression. It only takes a couple of seconds, so be very careful. Once again, it's time to stop the tape and write down all the safety precautions you've learned about each item listed on the screen. Restart the tape when you're finished. Stop the tape. Number 1 was hoist. You should have written that you'd check the web straps for cuts and wear or any breaks. Two safety precautions you should have written were 1. Do not stand between the hoist and the item being lifted, and 2. Don't place your hands or body between a vehicle and a hoist. Number 2 was A-frame. You saw the A-frame being used to remove a power pack. The safety precautions you were given on the A-frame were 1. You need 4 men, one positioned at each corner to move it safely. And 2, you were told to never get under the load that the A-frame is holding or between the A-frame and the load. Number 3 was saddle caps. You should have written that you'd removed the saddle caps. Remember, they are not fastened to the pack and can fall and injure you. Number 4 was exhaust system. You should have written stand at least 20 feet from the tank's exhaust system because of the extreme heat and fumes. You should have noted that the running engine must be ventilated. You were told 2 ways to do this. One was to use the portable exhaust system, which is vented outside, and the other was to use the permanent exhaust fans that are installed in some shops. Number 5 was main gun. You should have written that you never walk or stand under a main gun. It could fall to zero depression and injure you. You have seen several safety precautions that are peculiar to the M1 series tank. You should now be aware that these precautions are essential for your safety and those working around you. All units, combat or combat support, must have a good maintenance program. Vehicles can't fight if they can't make it out of the motor pool. Good safety practices are a must. An injured mechanic is of little use to the organization. Remember, always be safety-minded.